Hey, what's up, everyone? You're currently tuned into TBD on KCSB FM 91.9 Santa Barbara and netnetradio.com Tijuana. Today, Lietoc and I are joined by Phoenix, Arizona-based writer Marc Masters. Marc's been a longtime contributor to Pitchfork and The Wire, dating back to the mid-2000s. He's been holding down a monthly experimental column at Bandcamp Daily and is an author of 2 books, including last fall's High Bias, The Distorted History of the Cassette. Out now on UNC Press. How's it going, Marc?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Cool. Thanks for having me on.
Dude, thanks so much for being here. We're really stoked.
My pleasure.
So I guess, like, what have you been up to lately? Like, do you have any, like, I don't know, you pick up any new hobbies or anything like that? Like, what's your day-to-day looking like?
Well, I mean, it's the books, the High Bias book's been out for, I guess, like 5-6 months now. So it's finally sort of winding down. It's been occupying most of my time up to now, which is great. I mean, so many people were interested in it, which was really awesome and flattering and a lot of fun to talk about and stuff. So beyond that, I'm just sort of, watching my kids and trying to write about other stuff now.
You were doing, because you did a giant tour of the U.S. You went to 2020 or 2220 Arts in L.A., I think, to do a book talk for it. You were out at Harvest Records, record shop there in, oh goodness, is it North Carolina? I forget.
Yeah, Asheville.
Asheville, yeah. So you were going all over the country to talk about the book. You were on the best show to talk about. You came on Tabs Out.
I was.
To really help rectify some grammatical errors there. But
right.
Like, what was the turnout at those events consistently looking like, age-wise, kind of group-wise? Where was the conversation going? What was bringing people?
Yeah, well, I mean, the bulk of my trip was I did a little bit over a week on the East Coast, where I went from Atlanta up to, I guess, as far north as I got was New York. And everybody was really super cool. I mean, this has been a sort of really lucky thing to have written about a subject that really everybody knows something about. There's very few people that you have to explain what a cassette is. Even younger people who didn't grow up with them, at least their parents had them or something, or they're getting back into them now. So that's been really cool. I mean, part of it was I went to a lot of places where I have friends too. So a lot of my, friends from college came out and stuff, and that was cool. How hard it is to, excuse me, how hard it is to see those people in person after college is done and stuff. So that was really cool. It was kind of a little bit of a reunion tour that way. But everybody was really, it was just neat to hear so many. Everybody wanted to share their stories about their first cassettes or what they're doing with cassettes now, and I got a lot less of than what they expected in terms of cassettes. People still use them. Nobody's really that surprised about it. At least the people who are willing to come out and hear someone talk about a book about it.
That's really good. I think that's really beautiful to hear, because definitely, I don't know, I still encounter bits of that, but it's nice just to kind of get that immediately, where it's like an already established knowledge base that you're just jumping into.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's definitely been cool. Yeah, I mean, random people like parents of my kids' friends and stuff, when I tell them about the book, those people are often very shocked that people are still doing cassettes. But but I've been surprised by how many people kind of don't find it that surprising. Even if they didn't know it was happening, they're like, well, vinyl came back, why not cassettes,
Yeah, I was telling my mom actually that I picked up the book, or like when I picked up the book and stuff, and she's like, it's about cassettes? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh, that's so interesting. I want to read that. And then I'm like,
nice.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a good experience that way in terms of like my first book about no wave, was a lot of fun and I enjoyed doing it. Oh, awesome. You got a copy.
Which we'll talk about this in a little bit. Cool. I've got some stuff there.
But that's one there. Almost everybody who ever asked me about it, I had to explain something to them about it because they weren't that familiar with it, or they heard of it, but they didn't know what it covered and stuff. So this one has been like, I tell anybody about it and they immediately tell me their stories about cassettes.
Which is good. That's a wild 180 to get, but also, again, just speaks to the universality of the whole thing, and just something that, I don't know, I really love to hear that.
Yeah, it's great. It's been awesome. It's been like it was less of a tour as more than just a sort of a community celebration of this thing,
Yeah.
And at least right now, because when you announced the book, this was a long time ago in the past, like 5.5 years, you were living in DC. And then right after January 6th, or sometime like not too long after that, you made you rolled a D20 and you ended up in Phoenix, Arizona. And
Yep.
at least before we get into, really covering music or stuff, you were a big Washington Nationals fan. As far as I know, you still are. But some of the interviews I've seen you've been doing for this, you have been sprouting some Cardinals gear. And I'm curious about, you've got two teams now. How do you reckon with these two wolves?
Well, the Cardinals gear is for the football team, of course. But since we moved here, I've become a Diamondbacks fan for sure. And then they got to the World Series this year. My son is like this lucky charm. I mean, he got into baseball the year that the Nationals won the World Series, and then he comes here and the Diamondbacks make it. So we're thinking about putting him up for auction to any team that wants to make the World Series. We'll move there if you pay for it,
Yeah.
But no, I mean, still, I lived in DC area my entire life pretty much. This was our first big move I've ever made, besides some college stuff and grad school stuff. So yeah, it's been a bit weird, and we're still very tied to DC, and we still root for the Nationals, and we watch, pay attention to their other teams too, and we go back there every summer and stuff. So it's, DC is a great city, but it's fun in Arizona too. It's a lot warmer.
What, at least, because I've had a friend from San Diego area who moved out to Colorado and then settled in Arizona, and Arizona still is it's such a unique state, at least in terms of you can get a house. There's still investment or interesting things going on out there.
Right.
Music wise, also, I know, again, you've been getting to see, because there's some interesting DIY stuff that's coming through, and on your social media, you've just posted Corsano played there. Scene wise, what has it felt like for you out there? Thrift wise or record shop wise? I know you've posted some interesting stuff at that Goodwill, but I'm curious, kind of culture shock. What culture has shocked you out there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's basically, I knew this kind of before, but it's once you get there, until you get here, you don't really know it. There's two cities, Tucson and Phoenix, and there's basically nothing else anywhere else. I mean, there's like northern spots that have snow and stuff, like Flagstaff and things, and but otherwise, basically, there's two urban areas, and we're living a little south of Phoenix, but we're basically close to Phoenix. And it's interesting. There's a music scene here that's sparse but always happening. Like when people kind of associate Meat Puppets with here, Sun City Girls with here, and their legacies are still going. There's still people who were involved with them who are still doing things around here. The punk label Placebo, that had a lot of the punk bands in the early 80s here, has kind of this weird space. It's almost like a museum to themselves, and they put on events that are like about the history of Phoenix music. Like they had the Bishop Brothers come and play music and talk about being in the Sun City Girls here and stuff like that.
That's cool, dude.
So they seem to care about kind of maintaining the legacy of things that have happened around here, which is cool. And the record store scene is pretty good. There's a local kind of chain, sort of tower recordist chain called Zia.
That was it. They're in a Longmont Potion Castle. I know they're on volume 9.
Yeah. So that's pretty awesome for a store that has multiple locations. And then there's a place I go to a lot called Stinkweeds in Phoenix, which is really good. And down in Tucson, there's a great place called Wooden Tooth Records. It has a lot of great stuff. And it's not hard to find decent amount of music here. In a way, I think it's kind of nice being in a place where there's enough stuff happening, but I have to make a little bit more effort, so I'm not just going to a record store every day. Which I mean, I didn't really do that in DC. The DC record store scene was pretty sparse too, but just you could easily go up and down the coast and find all other kinds of record stores there. Here, it's like you either got to go in Phoenix or Tucson, so it keeps it limited somewhat. But bands come through. Yeah, I saw Corsano at this place called the Trunk Space, which Kill Alters is coming there in a couple of weeks.
I've got their tape up on my deck over here waiting.
Awesome. Trunk Space is legendary, I feel like.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, and so I've seen a good bit of stuff there. Record stores will have some in stores here and there. There's enough places to see decent. Like when I first got here, Godspeed was touring, and Tashi and Tom were opening for them.
Well, that's brilliant.
Yeah, and they played a separate record store show themselves, and then played with Godspeed. So stuff like that happens enough that it keeps it interesting here for sure.
I love hearing that. No, it can seem odd. I don't know, like Thomas, you're holding stuff down in Ventura oftentimes, and then I'm kind of just willing and bad in San Diego, and it doesn't always seem like there's like an in for DIY or for a certain kind of underground thing that can totally pass through San Diego, but go Phoenix to LA. And so that's
San Diego's
thing to watch.
San Diego scene is pretty sick now, though, I would say.
I've heard good things. Yeah, I've heard really good things.
Yeah, San Diego scene is getting kind of sick, like with what like Audrey and like Maddie are doing up there. Like they're actually making a scene. Like there's like a lot of people touring down there that I'm kind of like, what the heck? Like Midwife and stuff are going down there.
You got, I mean, again,
like, whoa, dude.
You got Che Cafe, which is really holding that down. And so I'm really happy again that connects to a larger thing. That is still definitively like the spot. You've got a couple record shops specifically. I mean, Jupiter or Folk Archer Records, and they have the book there as well. And they just had
nice.
They had Mary Latmore. She came through.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's crazy.
Show. Awesome. Incredible, brilliant stuff. Just sat right at the base of her harp, watching her and her docs just going for it. Tremendous.
Oh, that's cool.
And then again, I'm trying to think, like all those other little spaces, Tower Bar occasionally is throwing stuff. And then the space I was at out on
the Brown Building
Street. Yep. As at the building.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think San Diego has been underrated for ever since I was born, really, in terms of its music scene. I think people don't understand how much stuff really happened there. Have you seen that book about the 1970s?
I've been wanting to read it. They used to have it on sale there at the record shop, and I just completely I didn't realize it was a new book, and so I've wanted to check in with that and really get to my like San Diego roots. Last night it was funny, my friend, I was asking like trying to figure out because like I wanted to listen to the new Sonic Youth tape or was going to play a J. Rue tape, and I was like, what should I play? And she just told me, it's like, oh, just do Drive Like J. Rue, just jokingly like take like the J. Rue, the Damage name, and just and I'm like, yeah, I've got Gang Creme on tape, and I hadn't played in a second. And that, when I finally heard that, I think a couple years back, I was really like amazed at the fact that this came out of Encinitas. This came out of like a town that I'll drive to go see a movie at, or I pass through to like drink it like a beer at or something. And just that also ties to another piece of Arizona history with Jimmy Eat World, and they really wanted to work with the drummer of Drive Like Jehu. So,
oh, really?
That he produced those albums through like 2010, and his work on Clarity.
Interesting, dude.
I loved hearing Clarity. I was so amazed at what they got out of him for that. But
that's cool.
Even like I'm trying to think of a couple other figures. Tom Waits, who kind of moved beyond that scene. I just found out about Diamanda Gallas, and I didn't know that she was from San Diego.
Yep, and, she did a lot of stuff there.
Moved way out of that scene, and then
you know Glenn Galloway.
Glenn Galloway also's come up, definitely.
Yeah, from Truman. He was in Truman's Water there early, and then Octagrape, and he has a recording studio in San Diego, and he's been a big part of that scene for many, many years, and done a lot of cool stuff. Yeah.
And then and this is the one for me. This is like critical first music memory stuff. It's the Pinback singles from the 2000s that took off in San Diego and made a real like impact. And my parents, as a result, and they were CD Ride or Die, and they loved a lot of kind of Gen X alt rock and stuff. They got those Pinback albums in their collection. My mom loved Penelope. My mom loves Fortress. And those are great tracks I've been meaning to get back into the weeds and revisit. They still sell out any show they play here in town.
I bet they do. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I should say the name of that, if anybody's interested, is Bill Perrine. The book's called Alien Territory, Radical Experimental and Irrelevant Music in 1970 San Diego. Definitely check it out. Dude, it's got so much.
That actually sounds really sick. Yeah, that sounds
it's really good. Yeah.
We got to talk about some book recs at the end, because I know you got a little book pod going.
I do. I do.
I want to say too, I'm actually hosting a Phoenix, Arizona band in like a couple weeks here down in Ventura. Cool. Yeah, have you heard of this band called Closet Goth by chance?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, yeah, they're sick. They've been like long-standing part of that like DIY scene out there for like.
Oh, cool! I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, they're sick. It's funny because I didn't realize how long they've been around, but recently we have like a friend that like moved to Ventura, and she's been like getting involved in the scene, and that's how like we kind of met her and stuff. Because she was involved in her scene in North Dakota, of all places. And
oh wow.
Yeah, when I posted the Closet Goth flyer, she messaged me and she's like, dude, that band stayed at my house in North Dakota when I was booking shows. Like, and I was like, what the heck? I didn't know that band has been around for that long. But
wow, that's amazing. I definitely have to check them out.
That's they're cool. You'd like them.
Cool.
I wonder if they have any ties to Destruction Unit or any of the stuff that because I forget Destruction Unit, they had that label that they ran for a bit, or a couple of the guys did through like 2020. I never checked any of the tapes. Oh goodness, I forget them. I want to say it's Acetic House. I'm getting that right.
Oh, I'm not sure.
They put out a Callie Malone tape ages ago. That was the big
nice.
well.
Cool.
Anyways, I don't know, Maddie, should we move into some DIY origins, I guess?
I think we need Mark. Again, I've been reading your stuff for years, and then occasionally I follow you on Twitter. We follow each other, I think, because we both like Joe Pera. But
Cool.
you would post. I'm really curious about some of your origins in the 80s, kind of your development musically that got you to a point where you were faxing in a 1990 list and putting on, really, really like tender hardcore, this New York Ioneer Control.
Oh, wow, you've got a tape of that. That's amazing.
I don't think it's even listed on Discogs. I need to put it in the listing. So what was kind of like jumping you up to that point, pre-Nirvana, pre any kind of old explosion? How did like 120 minutes play a role in that? What was up?
Yeah, well, so I mean, in high school, I got into a little bit of cool music, but I was sort of rural, like about an hour away from DC when I grew up. So I knew a little bit of music, but from friends. There was a decent alternative station in DC, but it was tough for me to find anything. But it was really college radio. I went to William and Mary in Virginia, which is like in Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg.
My aunt went to William and Mary, and she's a
nice.
So
nice. Yeah. So they had a great radio station, and I was lucky enough to start working for them almost immediately after I got there. And that just, I mean, the exposure you get to so much music from college radio is just, especially back then when I couldn't find there wasn't any internet. So the only real way to find it was either magazines or college radio, and being involved with that, getting to see pretty much every record that came out that wanted to be played on college radio was like mind blowing, and I was into all kinds of like alternative rock stuff. I mean, like all the new wave stuff at the time, like the Smiths and the Cure and Echo and the Bunnymen and all that stuff. But also like as my 4 years there went on, to just more and more this weirdo underground stuff was happening, and those people were sending their records to college radios. So it wasn't that long before I was able to find out about like Sun City Girls and Truman's Water we were talking about, or those kind of bands. And yeah, I took a turn into that really fast. Especially fanzine. That was really a time when everybody had a zine, so I started one with some friends from college. It was called Crank, that we did like issues of, and that got me in touch with a lot of people and other fanzines. I mean, Banana Fish was a huge one for me back then, because it was just so weird and hard to understand, and it had all this weird music that I didn't comprehend, but I couldn't believe that people were putting out, because it made almost no sense,
when you're talking about music, and this is something, it dawned on me because I was reading Chuck Eddy's book, Rock and Roll Always Forgets, and it has some of his 80s writings on rock and metal. But his rock stuff, one of the pieces that I was super shocked to see in there and really happy, he writes about SST in 1987 or 88, when they're just throwing 40 to 60 titles to a degree that when I read the SST book a couple years back, I was like, oh, I did not realize they did this. But it was at that point you had like Universal Congress, you had the Fred Frith, you had a lot of free jazz, October Factionalization, all of this like total weird noise that the label was doing, that it would make sense in the 2010s on Astral Spirits, but SST never gets written about or talked about for that legacy. And yet, were you getting those kinds of albums? Were you getting also stuff like the New Zealand Expressway, any of the stuff that was coming from there at that time?
Yeah. That and Homestead was doing a lot of crazy stuff, because Gerard Cosway was running Homestead then, and Touch and Go had like every good noise rock band was happening through Chicago and through Touch and Go. And I mean, those places were really much like Astral Spirits and Orange Milk and the good labels now, were really curators as much as they were supporters. Like you relied on them to be like, if it's on this label, it's got to be something interesting. Didn't mean it was always great, but you knew it wasn't going to be something that you weren't going to care about at all. You were going to be interested in it. Somebody, it's funny. I mean, I was such a sort of a nerd and not really super social guy, but I socialized with bands and people who like music and stuff. But I remember like my senior year of college, I told my mom, I really like this label SST. And she's like, well, you should write them and see if they have any job opportunities. So I actually sat down and typed out a letter. I would love to work for your label. And I could tell they kind of laughed at it a little. They were very nice. They called me and everything, but I'm sure I cringe a little bit thinking about them reading that letter.
That's so funny. I can't believe they actually called you though. though. Like that's
it was really nice of them. Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah, that's nice. What the heck?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I never knew that you had written out to SST for that, because it was at that point where they were like really trying to get interns or do stuff. And
yeah. 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 And I think my parents advised me this because they figured, oh, it's a real company. It must be, they make records. It must be a real, they probably thought it was the same as like going to like IBM and asking them for a job.
Yeah, exactly. Asking a job from like Warner Music or something.
Just having it be 3 letters, that really, I think that really helped them. But definitely now, sure. After reading that SST book, I've gone out and tried to collect, and I've been meaning to get into the weird, like I got to get the Blind Idiot God stuff, the Trotsky Ice.
Oh, that stuff's great. Yeah.
The Nick Cave album. That's not a Nick Cave album, but it's tight. It's the one guy. These Immortal Souls. That's it. And then I've wanted to get a lot of that Touch and Go. The one band with the German name, Decreasen. I'm mispronouncing. Oh, yep. I need to grab that. I need that one.
Yeah. Which is great. I mean, it's funny that there's been a band. I'm old enough now that I bought this when it came out, and a band since has been named after it. And but yeah, that's a good comp. No Age for people who can't see us. It's called No Age. So that was basically the starting of how I got into music. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, and then as it kind of expanded into the 90s, because you were doing more kind of zine contribution work at that time, but you were also, I think, starting to dip into the world of print, and you were an early adopter, at least, of getting onto the internet to write about stuff. I'm not sure. I mean, you started appearing on Pitchfork in 2007, but before that, kind of even before some of your stuff in The Wire and the mid-aughts, what was that like 98 to 2002-ish period like for you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I so right out of college, I not only started that fanzine, but I started writing for some of what were considered sort of the industry magazines. There was like CMJ and Rockpool and those kind of things. So I did some writing for them, and got paid for it decently. But I sort of early on figured out that if I wanted to keep writing about the stuff just that I liked and not necessarily top 40 stuff, I probably would not be able to make a full-on living doing that. So I spent a lot of the mid to 90s to early 2000s establishing another career. I was a documentary film editor in DC. A lot of work there.
I saw that you mentioned that in your 2008 interview briefly, and I was like, I didn't realize you edited films, and also you did have you just edited films. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. So that kind of took me away from writing a little bit, although I was still writing for fanzines. I wrote a lot for that New Zealand magazine, Opprobrium. I don't know if you've ever seen that. This guy Nick Kane ran it. It was a really good one. Yeah, really cool. He ended up at The Wire later. And so I was writing for more sort of print zines still and stuff, and kind of biding my time until I felt like I was comfortable enough with that career that I could start using my spare time again for writing. And that's kind of when in the early 2000s when I hooked up with The Wire and Pitchfork eventually and stuff like that. So it was mostly zine writing. I don't think I'd written for anybody on the web really until Pitchfork. I mean, I probably, I've been in messaging groups, and there was this thing called Chug Changa, which was like a big indie rock messaging group. So, and everybody who writes for anybody now was on that at some point. So there were those kind of things.
Oh, that's dope.
A question about that, because I lurk on it consistently still. Were you ever on ILX, on I Love Music?
Yeah. I kind of missed out on that when it was in its super heyday. But I mean, tons of writers that I know were on there and got opportunities from being on there and stuff. And it definitely was a real vital thing. I think it still is pretty decently populated, but there was a time when it was like every writer was coming from there,
I love the way it's set up, because you get these messages. It's the like classic or dud of a band, and it's a 20-year conversation that no one's really debating. It's been settled, but like you go there because there's been a news update or a new cut,
right?
And then they have the rolling threads. There's little votes. There's about like I don't want to say 150 people, but there's 75 to 100 folks that are chilling and just, having good. And Ed Raggett has always been there holding it down like a champ. So I love when you look. I don't know if it still does this, but last time I looked, there'll be a thread that's been going forever, and if you scroll through it at one point, it says 3 years passed, and then another post will come up on it or whatever. It's kind of amazing. Yeah. It really is a good, just because it's like, there's a lot of critics that it becomes, and it has sort of been archived or it's still up. It's one of those resources form-wise that hasn't been lost to time yet. So that is like vital as a tool to get any cultural significance or get any sense of just what a few people thought. But
yeah, totally.
With some kind of like picking up with The Wire, how did you get in touch with those guys, and what has that relationship been like over the last nearly 2 decades here? Because you're still occasionally dipping in, and I've read one piece recently that you did on the archives, and it's that Andrew WK one. I thought that was killer.
Oh, that was so much fun. Yeah. Yeah, he's such an amazing guy. He's so I don't really know what he's up to now, but he's definitely super cool to talk to. And The Wire was like, there was this brief period too in the late 90s where I branched out a label from my zine that was called Crank Automotive. I did like some sick Bruce Russell stuff and some Alan Licks things. And, it was very short lived, but I used to send those to The Wire, and I just got in touch with them through that basically. And then Rob Young was the editor back then, who's written a book about cans since then, and he's a really great, amazing author. And I just ran into him a couple times at shows, and I just mentioned to him, I'd be interested in writing. I wrote a few things just to send to them on spec, and from there on, they just were really cool about it. They were like, if you want to write for us, just keep pitching us stuff, and I did. And there was a time there where that was all I was doing was they're definitely like I'd have an article and a few reviews in every issue, and things have changed there in terms of editors, in terms of who to work with, but I've never had any issues with anybody there. It's always been really cool. I mean, the great thing about them is at one point, I think even before I was writing for them, they bought the collective of writers bought the magazine. Mm-hmm. So it's always kind of run the same way. Like it's never been subject to the whims of some new owner who decides he wants to take it in a different direction or anything. Mm-hmm. And it's been really solid that way, and yet they still change. I mean, they bring in new writers all the time. There'll be people who is writing, every cover story for a year, and then someone else is doing it for a while, so I think they're really good that way.
What have you felt about, because I know they recently changed up, and I'm looking at my collection of the new tabloid edition. What have you thought about the slight logos and everything?
Yeah, to be honest, I actually haven't looked at a print version of it since they changed. I've only looked at the digital. But yeah, I guess it was inevitable that they had to change. I don't love the design as much but it might be the kind of thing that, in a while I'll forget that there was a different one before this.
It's funny because in the last issue, they finally, I think, published letter to the editors of people being irate about the cover change, but then are like, really hate this cover, but also that Conte story kicked ass. I didn't know that the magazine could still do this. I didn't know you guys had the bite in to do this, but one of the things I also love that they do at the contributor time is you get the reflections. And at KCSB, we did have some Wire issues. I think, if I'm getting right, it's the one with the Run the Jewels. I might have chosen the wrong one, but your 2016 reflection is one of my favorite little just things I stumbled upon ages ago. And cool. You're probably wondering, like, what the hell was I saying at the time? But you were, because again, 2016, very deeply political year. You had in DC, really just thinking like tides turning, shit's happening. Also it was seeing, like, again, a love for $75 bill, and I think a real renewal of kind of some of the music that you started to cover there on High Bias, and then that turned into the experimental column.
Right. Those reflection things are really cool. I haven't done one in the past couple of years, which I feel bad about, because even though sometimes you sit down and you're like, what am I going to say? It's hard to sum up a year. It makes you think about, what's happening, what's changing, what's still important, and I do like reading those. There's always some, at least a few entries in there where you're like, oh, wow, I really need to check this out if it's inspiring this person so much,
And again, with like the Pitchfork stuff, because I know as years have gone on, you kind of are just settled into doing a few a year, if at all. And I still am always happy to see a Marc Masters byline for.
Oh, thanks.
There's one, that one tape that you did on 3. You wrote about an album that I think's out on 3 Lobed, and I've been meaning to get. Or it's not 3 Lobed. It's Brian Coley's label. I always get those two mixed up.
Feeding Tube.
Yep, Feeding Tube. Yeah. It's that jazz one with a red and black cover.
Jazz one with a red and black cover that I reviewed for Pitchfork.
Yep, 8.0. I forget. If I look, I'll be able to immediately get the name.
Yeah, for some reason it's not ringing a bell, but
anyways, though, with the one thing that you did at Pitchfork and continued to Tumblr for a bit, this to me, it's when people talk about like Pitchfork as a resource, and it really is important as an archive, and it's a nightmare to navigate that website and find some of this stuff. The outdoor,
it really is.
The Outdoor to me is a column that totally fit in that 2006 era where they were doing like this month in grime, this month in dubstep, these kinds of electronic columns. And you and Grayson were really documenting all kinds of stuff that came off that path, just experimental wise, and really giving them a platform in a way that it's not there anymore, or it just feels like another thing that had disappeared. What was in the 2010s really Pitchfork like as a contributor for you to work with before at least say kind of like Condé Nast buyout or anything of that time?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I always had a good relationship with them. They always were cool people to deal with. The editors were always great. And, they had their internal issues like anybody else. And I think, and it definitely, it was one of those funny places to, like with The Wire. Wire has some controversies here and there, but I'm always sort of like, I can see why they did what they did. With Pitchfork, there would be things they would publish, and I'm like, ugh, but there's a wide range of stuff on there. So luckily, there's room for everything kind of. And I mean, the Outdoor was amazing because at one point they said they were thinking about having some new columns. Grace and I pitched them the idea, they took it, and then they almost never had any editorial oversight on it at all.
Oh, my goodness.
They would help us, clean it up and stuff, but we didn't have to pitch them who we were covering in each one. We didn't have to pitch them what we were doing in terms of like, was it going to be an interview or an essay or whatever? We just had completely free reign. And that made it great because we were trying to be very conscious of, has this person ever been covered on Pitchfork before? Because we were trying as much as we could to get people who otherwise would not get covered on there into the website somehow. So, which I think we were able to do pretty well. And that was definitely one super fun thing about it.
Like, at least one that kind of sticks out to me or comes to mind just because I love Cranky. And a lot of those reviews for early Cranky are there on a version of the site that you got to use Web Archive for. And people like Brent Sirota, who are still writing and I think really doing, like Brent wrote some great pieces in the 90s and early aughts on that stuff. But
definitely
really like to the wayside. But the Fontanelle review, I think, is still up and they hate it, despise that Fontanelle. And it's not one of the best not one of the best Cranky albums, I will admit, but you guys gave, I think, a lovely piece when you talked about Vitamin F or their 2012 on Southern Mort.
Right.
And just like totally gave a new lens into the band and complete renewal. Even in like 2015, the experimentalist that you guys put together with the Charlene Beats or one of the members.
With Tom Carter,
I was like, let's go. It's so cool to see.
That was really fun to do that. And the whole thing has opened up opportunities that even The Wire sometimes couldn't. Like at one point, Grayson and I decided, let's do a whole edition that's just about Lauren Connors, because we just feel like we had so much to say about him and everything. And we had the idea, well, why don't we get some people to talk about him? Because so many people played with him. And I just on a whim got in touch, wrote to Corwood, and I said, I know the representative from Corwood, Jandek, has played with Lauren. Would he like to have anything to say about him? If so, here's my phone number. And one day I was actually sitting at my wife's parents' place. We were having like brunch, and I looked down on my phone and it's ringing, and it's the number and it says Jandek.
Oh, that's crazy.
So I ran out of the room and I said, hey, you want to talk about this? He's like, yeah, I'd love to talk about Lauren. I'm like, can I record it? He's like, I'd really rather you not record it. So as he talked to me, I was typing on my mother-in-law's computer everything he was saying.
Oh my goodness. Was that for you? Knowing at least anything I've picked up from other interviews and stuff, Jandek, massive, big Marc Masters artist, huge. I know there was I was talking with a guy named Adam who had booked a festival down in Miami, Florida. And you had, I think, written a bit about it because he was like, I thought Jandek was on it and loves Jandek.
Big holy grail of him for me, for sure.
What, at least two questions then on Jandek, like entry point for you for Jandek, or that, people should maybe go to, because there's a really wide group of things there, but also just like, how did you kind of stumble into him, and what was it like in that moment? Did you ever imagine, I'll get to talk to this man?
No, I definitely never imagined that. I mean, when I got to college and saw some of his records, he was already starting to be a little bit of a legend then, mostly because he he was anonymous, obviously, but also he would send like 5 copies of every record to every radio station. He would just flood stations and record stores too with copies of his records. And so everybody had these records, even if nobody knew what to make of them exactly. So he was obscure, but he also wasn't hard to find in a weird way. So that made him kind of legendary. And just the fact that every record had something new on it that you didn't know who he was and what was behind it. And then that documentary about him came out, which, he still wasn't known at that time. And that was really interesting. And so, yeah, no, I mean, I certainly never imagined, I figured no one would ever talk to him, or see him in his lifetime. So, and then there was that big shock of him. Suddenly someone said, hey, he played in England this weekend, and everyone was like, no way, that can't be true. Then the internet was up enough then for that rumor to fly pretty fast, And now we've had this second life of him, which is just as cool and weird as his anonymous life. And yeah, I mean, he's a
couple shows in New York, if I recall.
Yeah. And his shows have always been weird and crazy. Like he did that funk show in Houston where he played with a full-on funk band, and yeah. So he's just always still been really unpredictable and weird. And yeah, and if people want to get into him, I mean, if you go to Corwood Industries website, everything he's put out ever is on CD now. And I think it's like if you can get a box of 20 for like $80. So wow. Like find a couple of friends who are interested and split a box with somebody, and you're spending almost no money, and you can find out, and you can get stuff from the beginning all the way up to now. There's so many different phases, and it's really cool.
We gotta do this, Thomas. We gotta have a Jan Dick.
I know. Yeah, for sure, dude. We gotta jump into some Jan Dick, dude.
Okay, cool.
It's as it was all going, or at least something kind of out of the outdoor came as it was kind of winding up. Bandcamp. At least you got contacted by the editor of Bandcamp Daily to start running a column that first was High Bias. And I remember getting into cassettes right at like the final 2 issues of High Bias.
Oh, nice.
And just being like, unbelievable. This column has stopped. I'll never know where to get. And then again, experimental picked up. And it was like, there's still 2 to 3 tapes. But what is, that relationship with Bandcamp Daily been like? How has that column evolved for you, and what at least work-wise does it look like, and how you kind of set up what needs to be represented in experimental that doesn't cross with like acid test, ambient, electronic. Sometimes something I think might fit on experimental ends up there, and I like that.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, that is a challenge. I mean, I've been sort of loosely in touch with the other column writers, and we try to share a little bit about what we're going to do, but sometimes we end up overlapping, which I think is fine, because not everybody reads all the columns, but we do try to keep it as distinct as we can, just so as many good artists as we can get exposed through it, But writing for them has been great. Yeah, they approached me when they first started an editorial side, and they gave me some interest. The first thing I ever did was this long conversation with Jim O'Rourke about all the stuff he was putting up there, which was really fun. Yeah. And then I pitched them the idea of a tape column, and they were into that. And then after a few years of it, they were like, we kind of want to morph this into something with a lot of contributors. They now have this tape label report thing that they do. They were more interested in that, but they were like, since you've been covering so much experimental stuff with the tape column, would you be interested in just making an experimental column? So that it kind of morphed into 2 different things that way. And that's what it's been since then. And yeah, I mean, basically every month I just try to comb through. I get a lot of things sent to me, which is awesome. I love finding out about stuff that way. And then I also just try to comb through what's tagged as experimental on the site, or what is adjacent to stuff that's tagged as experimental. And lately I'm trying more and more to like search by countries too, because it's very easy for me just to cover Western or even just American stuff. So I'm trying more and more to go to other, because there's definitely cool experimental stuff happening in every country. It's just harder to find out about some of it. So I'm trying to get in tune, but it's a huge world. There's so much happening.
Yeah, for sure.
No, because I remember a while back, I know kind of what you're getting at there, because it was the tweet from Adam Donovan, the TMT contributor. Now he runs Warm Winters, and he mentioned that it's like Bandcamp Daily and a lot of these sites don't cover all of this music that is happening around the world. That is extremely. You have to get that knowledge, and it's super hard to just immediately pivot then to be like, I'm going to cover that, especially when I feel that with Tabs Out, because I only have enough time. I really want to write dedicated hardcore, like classic, like Pitchfork style 800, 1200 reviews on a cassette. Usually. I don't want to write 200 to 300 little synopses, even though that might be more value, and I may need to swap to doing that personally. that there's only so much you can have time for, and there's only so many labels that you might know about or get contacted with, and it really is hard to find those mediators that connect to other stuff. Like, and again,
as you, I was going to say, just as you probably have this problem with Tabs Out and I do with Experimental Home, if I just took everything that everybody who I like and care about sent me, I still wouldn't be able to fit it all in one column.
Yeah.
So just doing that is hard enough, but then also trying to branch to the stuff that I don't know about, it's very time consuming.
And again, because it's no longer a cassette based column, it really is, you're talking vinyl, CD, digital. Yeah. And I'm assuming the inbox is flooded.
It is. If I could somehow like take a month of my time and just respond to every email, I'm just so backed up. Well, everybody is, of course, but
of course.
But you want people to know that you really appreciate them sending your music. I mean, I get so many things where somebody's like, I like your writing and I'd love you to write. And I was like, I'd love to write about you too. I hope I can someday, but it's just so hard to find the time for everyone,
Yeah.
Thomas, do you ever feel that with band bookings, or do you ever get any international bands that are like trying to randomly do a DIY tour out here?
Yeah, I mean, dude, I get like requests all the time from just like people all over the place. Like I put like my booking stuff on what's it called? There's like this website called Do DIY. It's kind of like the new like book your own effing life or whatever kind of. I feel like they're trying to pick up the place with that. Yeah. And I really appreciate everybody that reaches out. But then also like aside from all the people I don't know that are hitting me up through like their I have all of the people that are hitting me up from within my network that like I feel like I kind of have to prioritize because like they've helped me out, I've helped them out, and it's like, for sure, I really appreciate you guys reaching out and wanting to play a show here, but like I can't. You know what I mean? And it happens all the time, and it's like there's been a few people who have been like booking like way before me that like I don't know, gave like really good advice. And it's just very simple advice, but it's like, you just have to learn how to like politely say no, or just like not respond, and they're not going to take it personally. Cause it's like, you want to be able to help them as much as possible, but it's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I feel like it's so random. Like, if someone emails me at a moment when I've got a lot of free time, I'm able to get right back to them, and I feel almost bad. Like, you're just lucky that it happened, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly,
and that's the same with me when I'm pitching articles to places. I can tell sometimes I just caught the person at the right time, but that's part of the whole thing,
And
yeah, that's definitely. Go ahead, Manny. Sorry.
Or no, just going at least one thing, because again, I do still give a lot of credit to the column for continuing to expand, and at least it feels right now. And I couldn't say this a couple years ago. It's like with Mappa and Warm Winters, I think those are like definitively Eastern European outposts. And I wish I could have that time to really get in the weeds and cover them and see what's going on.
Yeah.
This last year, because we put this right at the top for Tabs Out, and Mike apparently made a zine copy of our 200. And I'm really sad because I wanted to spill my guts out all across it. But I wrote just like one piece about this and the Strategic Tape Reserve tape, and that Strategic's been going for a decade, and I'm just so impressed with the culmination or the curation and the honesty of the vision. I think Eamon happens to really be dialed in, but like this to me might be some of the most important ambient that's come out, and probably the fact that it is like there's like 50 years of electronic music on this synthetic bird music.
That's awesome.
And I'm so
that comp out.
Out. Mappa. And,
Mappa's a great label.
And it really, I think the best tweet I've seen that described it, someone said something about Eastern Europe. They seem to just like really understand climate change, or at the precipice of like some real novums. And so that's also why I'm really liking this music, is it just feels so new in a way that I wasn't anticipating to get. And I think really speaks a bit to the regionality of the tape.
Yeah. That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, there's just so much good stuff going on so many places, and it's a good problem to have, It's nice that we have this sort of rich thing to draw from, with so many different and so many ways to make connections. I mean, that's always been a great theme for me from when I first started getting into any kind of underground music, is that you meet great people doing it too, and people so like-minded, and it makes you feel like, there's a lot of people like you out there, even though they're not readily available on the street or whatever, but they're there,
With even kind of in your current state, because you really, you're, I think, just in such an interesting role as like an elder statesman writer covering this stuff. And you had mentioned, again, knowing years ago, this is not a viable career, dipping into the world of, documentary editing to really make ends meet and still pursue this passion. In the future, you think, where do you kind of see your writing going? And even like how perhaps people should approach not trying to make it big with music writing, but writing to cover and care about this DIY stuff.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I feel like it hasn't changed much in terms of it's really hard to make a living. It always has been, and it's even much harder now to make a living writing about music. So you're probably going to be happiest and most secure if you can get your income from somewhere else. Now that's hard. I mean, it was easier when I was in my 20s and 30s. I didn't mind staying up all night writing about things and spending the weekend writing about things. It's harder now that I have kids and I'm more tired and stuff like that. But yeah, in terms of the future, I don't know. I mean, definitely, I think a lot. What's weirdly coinciding with this kind of terrible time in online writing, with when everybody's being Bandcamp and Pitchfork and everybody's being downsized or kind of shrunk for weird reasons or whatever. There's a lot of cool stuff happening in print, just like there is in physical media with music. I mean, there's lots of good zines, way more good zines now than there were maybe 10, 15 years ago. There's a lot more interesting music books coming out now, I feel like, than there was not too long ago. And that's I think Academic Press is like the one that put High Bias out. They're much more interested in sort of non-academic approaches to music now, as opposed to, you don't have to, it doesn't have to sound like a thesis or a school paper for them to publish it, which I think makes a big difference. I think that's opening a lot of opportunities for music writers who you don't necessarily have to be a professor to write for an academic press now, which I think is helpful.
You mentioned the zine stuff, and I know, at least from some social media, because you had been buying print zines, and I'm curious about which ones you've been looking at, and really just what embellishes, what makes like a great zine to you.
Yeah, well, there's one actually based in Phoenix that's been going forever that's really cool called Fluke. That covers a lot of cool music, and that one I keep up with as much as I can. It's all goes all the way up to like Maggot Brain is really a good source right now for music. Trying to think of some of the other. There's a guy named Josh Amberson in Portland who does this one called Basic Paper Airplane, and he also distributes tapes and stuff, and so he's doing a lot of interesting things. And I mean, I think the most interesting thing to me about a zine that goes back to the days when I was doing them in the 80s and 90s is that they have sort of a personal perspective. You get the feeling that you're hearing from this person or this group of people more so than with bigger magazines and websites where you're almost encouraged to ignore who wrote it, and you're more supposed to be interested in the subject than the person who wrote it, which the subject is ultimately more important. But I love about zines where I feel like I'm getting this person's thoughts sort of unfiltered and direct, and I'm getting a glimpse of the kind of their inner thoughts and stuff like that, and also just the fact that they spent the time to lay it out and print it and everything makes me feel like I want to reward them with giving my attention to what they did.
Oh, and I'll tell you right now, they do numbers at Fest. That more than like any other zine. I think music zines or music VHS tapes, and cassettes, all viable at Zine Fest far more than is being. I've been meaning to get something for my brother because he does that world of zines, and I realized like that's that right there is a market that you have not capitalized on. But I'm amazed. I went to the LA Book Arts Fest and it was like, oh, this is it. This is happening.
Yeah. And I do think excuse me just a second. So there's this Microcosm Publishers. I don't know if you know them, but they're doing zines and stuff, but they're also doing things that are kind of like hybrids of zines and books. Like this is a whole history of Cleveland punk and post-punk from one guy's perspective. And it's like a zine sort of, but it's really long. It's really researched. So it's close to a book, but it still has a zine quality to it.
Kind of like a self-printed monograph or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And Microcosm does a lot of this kind of books where low run and kind of in between a zine and a book. I think there's a lot of potential for that too, because it gives people a place to really write about history without having to feel like they have to sell 1 million copies in order for it to, exist.
And again, like that seems like another good extension of something that isn't quite an in for a ton of people, but it's had a long storied history, and there's ebbs and flows of good and great ones of the 33 1/3 series. And those get in libraries consistently.
Yep.
So I've checked out a few of those, and some of them I've been very shaky on. I don't think there's anything that the in utero one really had to say. But then some I'm like 2 thumbs way up on. Like I thought the Andrew WK one really, because there was an oral history.
Oh, that's great.
Brilliant. Yeah. I thought Jen Pelly did a very honest job with the raincoats, and just like there's some nuggets there that are so good. The recent one that I loved, it was the Young Marble Giants, was really
I need to read that one.
That one was taking some massive swings at a point where I just come off of I had just read Kyle Gann's book on 433. That gets brought up. It's not Kyle Gann's book, but 433 keeps getting cited. And there's this, I was super amazed by like the social kind of constructivist argument that was being made, finally going back and looking at Wales in a way they couldn't quite do. You couldn't do an 80 or 81 to write about the album. So I've always been a fan of that series, but the zines, I'm seeing libraries as well take a bigger chance on adding a zine library. San Diego Public Central Branch is doing that. And
that's cool.
Even expanding out, because we're mentioning there's a lot of great music books. I tweeted, I know when you moved to Arizona, you were shocked to find Dillatime at your library.
Yeah.
My library also got it. We got the giant Ed Piskor hip hop graphic novel compendium. But even beyond that, we have Glitter Up the Dark in our collection. We got some of the Steve Hayden stuff. There is, even just beyond like a couple of those examples, there are a lot of music books coming out. And it seems like a lot of actual public libraries now might be interested to get them and really collect them. Not just like, these came from San Francisco's collection through an ILL that I picked up. There's the only library in the state, I think, that's got No Wave. And if I lose it, I got to pay $150. So I basically but it thrills me because there is all this great information coming out right now that I think is there at a consumer level, and it's not as locked out or nerdy. And I'm curious again about, because you developed like a book podcast to talk about all this stuff. What books have you loved music wise?
Well, you mean overall or lately or both? Or?
Lately, and then lately, also overall, if anything, just goes to the back there. Yeah.
Well, I really love the one we were just talking about earlier, the Alien Territory one about San Diego. I think that's great. There's a one that I just finished, although it's been out for like a year. I finally got myself to wrap my head around it. There's one called Who Cares Anyway? It's a San Francisco post-punk book.
Sick. That's cool.
Yeah. It's really long, but it's once you get into it, it really goes. I mean, it covers all kinds of Flipper and Negative Trend, all the way up to Thinking Fellers and Carolina and Neil Hamburger and all that stuff.
Sick, dude.
Yeah. It's got some great stories, and it covers like Faith No More.
I didn't realize. Oh, and Faith No, it almost. Yeah. I didn't realize No Trend was San Francisco, but it makes.
Well, this is actually a band called Negative Trend. It's a different band.
Oh, what am I thinking?
No, it's easy to confuse those. I thought that at the same time when I was reading, and then I remembered, okay, that's a different band.
Negative Approach, Negative Trend.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny,
but yeah, it's got a lot of great stories in it. I mean, the way that Faith No More developed, I mean, they were pretty abstract, weird band before they got big, and a lot of the other people passed through that band before they got big too. It's a really interesting book. It's definitely recommended.
It's interesting that they talked about Thinking Fellers Union. Like, I didn't think that they were that big. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, they weren't really that, but that's the great thing about this book is it kind of treats everybody on the same plane. And talks about how they got together. And because at the time in San Francisco, all these bands some of them ended up being huge, some of them ended up being lost, all kind of shared the same spaces and did a lot of the same things. I mean, Greg Turkington, who's Neil Hamburger, was in versions of all these different bands. And, like I think Faith No More had one of his weirdo bands open for them at once they were big, like at a big venue in San Francisco, and everybody was like, what the hell is going on here? So it was really cool seeing that way. Yeah.
I just know I should have gone and seen him last month. I was like not in a mood to see him on a Thursday night. I'm poor right now. I don't want to drive down.
Well, you also want to be in the right mood for Neil Hamburger. If you're not in a good mood for him, that's not a good situation.
One of my favorite tapes. It's the Hot February Night that drags opening for Tenacious D, and that, I mean, oh my goodness, he really that crowd is pissed. They do not know what they're getting, and it's one of the best. As a result, it's just so good.
Yep, absolutely. It's cool. So yeah, that's one. I mean, I'm trying to think of what I've read recently that's good. I mean, the Lou Reed book was good. The 33rd book on body count is really good.
Okay. Ooh.
Yeah.
I did. Wait, hold on. I've got that over here. They're talking this body count.
Yep. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's really cool. I didn't really know how much of that band had such a history beyond just Ice-T. I mean, there's really good musicians in that band who have known each other since like high school and stuff. So the story's really cool. Yeah.
That's definitely been a spot that I've been trying to get into is with more of that hip hop stuff. I read a bunch of hip hop literature last year and I didn't read Jeff's big compendium or big history book, but like the Pitchfork novel was great. Tim Lawrence's book that covers the New York clubs, because that inserts in there so well. You have that history, the Run DMC bio. Again, you keep getting to read all of these histories that keep getting into the same stories and stuff from different perspectives. It's really cool. And it seems like now, really especially, you can just get even more of that. I got a bit of sense of that with some krautrock books recently. David Stubbs one I liked, and then there's Utrecht Alderts that he did. And that's he did a really honest, good job looking at identity construction. And then I read the 2006 Faust book, and that was a blast.
Oh, wow.
You guys are real
cool. I need to read that one. I haven't read that one. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's an endless amount of great books right now that you can find that have real history and real. I mean, I personally, I think most people feel this way, but I definitely do, that I appreciate music a lot more when I know more about how it got made. It just makes me more excited about it and more interested in it.
Oh, absolutely. A good set of I mean, again, it's also why I collect a bunch of the Roar tapes or some of the Rhino stuff, because the liner notes. I'm in it for the liner notes just to get the book. Yeah, I have quite a few box sets, especially vinyl box sets, where the book, I would have bought the book by itself if it had come out by itself. I almost feel like taking the books out and putting those on my bookshelf sometimes to remind me to look at those. I think another example with one that you wrote the Pitchfork review on with Pylon. The book was
the book's incredible.
God, the book. I just reading it was the Steve Albini quote where it's like, okay, we did it. No one had figured this out, or this had never been acknowledged in regards to Big Black Sound. He just, I loved, and I was vamping Pylon. Killed me.
That's amazing. Yeah.
When I remember reading that, I'm like, well, I guess I'll just call Pylon industrial now. We can solve that or get into we have fun with genre debates online now. But, I remember even still, it's big book for people that, I don't know, Thomas, I don't think you had read it, but Our Band Could Be Your Life still circulates really well around people that are burgeoning into this stuff in their early 20s, but there are massive gaps and, bands that were just not covered. And it's reading something like Crazy Town, which has the Pylon and B-52s chapter. It feels like those could have been in the book. And it feels like you're getting another extension of that, and the realization just to get all those histories out. I totally feel you. There's so much good stuff right now, and you read it and then you're excited for this music to jump in and find it.
Yeah. I just talked to Michael Azerrad because, he came out with this new version of his Nirvana biography. And so I talked to him for my podcast, and it's really fascinating. I mean, he goes through the whole book and comments on how each thing happened and what he thinks of it now, and what's changed since then. It's really, really, really interesting. I mean, and he's also just the fact that he wrote that book, which is so influential, and then Our Band Could Be Your Life, which is so influential. It's those are his only two books, but they're two of the most important music books in history.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, speaking of, we keep talking about books, and we're not here to really talk about this one, although if you can get a hold of No Wave, do it, because it is really good. I hope at some point this can get repressed for the images alone.
Yeah, I hope so too. We're working on it. We're working on it.
But we're going to try to keep this one in print forever. It's called Hypothesis.
Yeah, hopefully this one won't have the same problem.
Aggressively readable, Mark. First 4 chapters, I was super pleased because you were not trying to give. And I've seen in other interviews where I could have spent another year writing about hip hop. I could have spent a year writing about this. how was it to at least call back and figure out, at least for kind of the history, the 20th century chapters, where the direction was going and what was like, gotta cover it. Okay, we're gonna call back a bit.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting process. I mean, when I first got the idea to write the book and got the contract and everything, and knew it wasn't going to be a massive book, knew it was going to be relatively slim. I kind of, part of the reason I called it High Bias was because I wanted to telegraph to everybody that this is just what I've been able to find out. Somebody else could go to the hip hop section and write a completely different, with different characters, and still tell the same story in a lot of ways, because there's just so much in each part of it that could be told about. And so I kind of wanted to make it pretty clear that this is, these are selective kind of little histories about what Cassette has affected. And but it was fun. I mean, there were times when I'm like, man, I would just like to keep going with this one subject, but I had to keep reining myself in and decide what I thought was the more important stuff, or the stuff that at least symbolized the things that weren't, covered enough so that if I wasn't able to mention something, this was symbolizing what you were missing, sort of, and also indicating where you could go to find out more. Right? That's what I hope is people will read it and think if they really are interested in like what the way Go-Go dealt with tapes. There are other books out there that cover it more extensively. There's other ways to find out more about Go-Go, and I hope people will launch into those. That was always my favorite kind of books, where I'd read through and I'd be like, oh, I got to learn more about this one thing, even if it's not in this book. This now has pointed me to where I can go find more about krautrock or whatever subject it might be covering.
Totally.
So that was kind of fun.
It's like it's fun because I've been doing MLIS work through San Jose State, so I've looked into like information needs of music listeners and stuff, and accidentally as a result have found random articles that cover like death metal scene in Florida, cassette scenes, or all kinds of stuff around the world. And you just know, this is a very, very situated, all kinds of things happening that cannot be compended, but it's beautiful to see. So I respect the hell out of those first 4 chapters for being such a great introduction to the tape and doing it. I remember our library got this awful cassette documentary, but all of the information that was there that was good is here.
That's cool.
But then we get into this back half, and this back half is where I think you really started cooking, Mark. Really was. The Tape Hunter chapter could have been a documentary script. So again, we love Awesome Tapes for Africa. We love Sahel Sounds, and getting to hear those guys and their histories, along with some of the other players that I've never heard of, just going out there for that dedicated love of sound. What did you learn about at least the art of crate digging from those individuals?
Yeah, that was really fortuitous, because the one thing I was sort of most worried about with this book is how can I not make it just about the West, because the tapes affected non-Western countries as much or more as it did the West. And so, but, there's been whole books written about certain areas of the world and the way the cassettes affected them. But those people had to sort of live in those countries to be able to write them. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to travel for this book. So I'm like, how can I kind of tell that story without it sounding like I'm just doing it from an academic perspective and reading other articles? And luckily, I know about enough people who are going out and doing this work themselves, digging up cassettes, dusty bins and kiosks and things like that. And so I decided maybe that would be the best way to tell that story, or at least contextualize it. And the lucky kind of byproduct of that is these are fascinating people. The journeys are fascinating that they've taken to go find these cassettes. It's really, and it's very kind of inspiring. Like, they're really preserving history in a lot of ways. I mean, some of this music only ever came out on cassette, and once the cassettes were sold, that was it. No one was going to be repressing it unless these guys were over here finding that stuff. So it made me think a lot about how archiving, and there's so many ways to be an archivist, so many ways to be a preserver of things, a documenter of things. And it's not just these official channels and libraries. And as much as I love libraries, or, Library of Congress and things like that, there's other ways to do it. And it needs to be done because it's almost impossible to cover it all,
No, and again, it's funny you mentioned like other part of the world that has had these thriving cultures entirely. So in 2020, when I started going on Discogs and finding out about like Indonesian tape labels, or not tape labels, but people that were just didn't completely die, and you could get source tags and codes, and I Get Wet from Indonesia, and these are licensed legit. And I was like, I have to get that. Or digging in Joshua Tree and finding like the Scruff McGruff like tape for $1. And people really want this guy, and it's a killer tape. again, something like this is hanging out on a dollar table somewhere in America right now, waiting. Or like, again, what Sawhill Sounds did, like grabbing stuff, releases like this, or then randomly on eBay. A guy was selling a bunch of Negative Land and Sonic Youth. He had these Sonic Youth shows, and he was trying to sell them as blanks, and it's never revealed where he got them. I never. Wow. He also had a Sealand tape called Allie the Alligator. There's so little info, and it's tied to Negative Land, and it's a series of kids songs. I don't even know if it's on YouTube. But
never heard of that.
Interesting.
And then it was just sold on eBay. I saw it. I think, Thomas, I sent you the PJ Harvey dry tape from that, if I recall. Because he had like 2 extra copies, and I'm like, sweet, I'm giving those to my pals. But when you bring up that sense of archiving, even I've talked a bit about this with Mike Haley, of like, he has sort of stopped collecting cassettes almost because he's at like a 1-in, 1-out policy. He doesn't have a successor or an apparent heir on the East Coast he can pass off that library, his giant room to. But, you know, we care about those tapes. I care about, like, I even think now I'm at about 2,200, if not more, cassettes over 5 years. I got to get that. I have to get this to someone, somebody. I don't want my Wax Tracks or SST or shoegaze collections to just die. I don't want a giant magnet to fall and destroy them. I don't, but again, just totally. And then but that's like also again from like a very Western perspective, or to me, it covers all this Western music that's I never knew compared to the other stuff that's going on around the world. It's just really good to read about that and kind of see us trying to connect or figure out that there is a really, really weird archival effort that's very patchwork going on.
And just the fact that so much of it existed only on cassette and never made it to any other formats, you know, wouldn't have existed without cassettes. It just makes you realize how important cassettes were in that way too. I think people think of it as, oh, it was another format that came out that was easy and cheap, and that's great about it too. But it also had its time period where it was the format, and as a result, a lot of history just exists on tape.
Absolutely. And again, it's like going through my dad's mixtapes or certain things. There's a mixtape from when I'm like 3 years old of all my favorite music. And it's the Blind Boys of Alabama. There's the Blind Boys of Mississippi All-Stars. It's Mississippi All-Stars. I'm dying that like at the age of 3, that was what I was loving.
That's cool.
Your mixtape chapter as well is really beautiful. You contacted just a lot of folks that had stories from all over. And I know you had to go on Facebook to reach out or find different people for that. But how was that one developing over the course of writing? Because I know that was, again, a real challenge to get to.
Yeah, that was a tougher chapter because unlike all these other scenes, there's not like a famous mixtape maker or a famous, you know, it's a 1-to-1 thing. Yeah. Everybody made mixtapes for everybody else and nobody got bigger than anybody else. And so it's a very level playing field, which is great, but it made it a challenge to be like, how can I tell some stories here? You know, who do I even find? And so that's one of the, I don't love doing the whole kind of Facebook crowdsourcing thing for writing, but I really didn't see any other way to do it. I just needed to find personal stories. I did luck into the fact that I know this woman, Sarah in DC, Sarah Grady, who has a whole website about mixtapes and mixtape history and doing, you know, writing about the way different mixtapes she traded. So I could kind of base on that a little bit, talk to her a lot and give her story and her stories of other mixtape friends she had. And at one point I just realized if I just tell a lot of interesting stories, people will probably connect with this because pretty much everybody who grew up with tapes has those same kind of stories and likes to hear about them. So I kind of had to trust that everybody would find that interesting because there's not really a big narrative. There's just sort of mixtapes were a cool thing and a lot of people did them, you know?
Oh yeah. And kind of then that leads in though to the final chapter, which I really love this final chapter because it gives that unique point for some of these experimental cassette labels that have really come to define Bandcamp. And some of this stuff, the arguments where it was going to, I remember I was analyzing Bandcamp for media studies pieces I was writing in college in 2020, really like looking at the platform as a piece of technology that was reinventing tape music as kind of home taping had. But what shocked me about it, seeing in what you do, you really, I think, inadvertently counter some of the aura that Simon Reynolds' Retromania nabs at. And I love Retromania. Great book. Simon, to me, it's Simon's bloggiest book. So there's a lot of his blog humor or goofy, the kind of goofiness of him comes through, and he's not as pedantic as it seems. But you bring up that point. I forget who you got the quote from Joanna about the cassette as a modern day act of creative anachronism. And it totally resets a timeline for how you could look at the development of this music as well as just kind of what's to come. And did that quote, finding that quote or kind of other stuff around as you were making that chapter, reshape how you had felt about the last 15 odd or so years, dating back to like Altered Zones or some of the MP3 blogs, development of Crash Cymbals, Mike moving out of 905 tapes to Tabs Out, like of what's really been going on the last 15 years?
Yeah. That was one of the few chapters where being academic about it actually helped. I found some academic articles where people were sort of theorizing about what tapes mean now that I did find really helpful and definitely helped me form my arguments, because I just felt like the point I wanted to get across in that chapter was not only how much cool stuff is going on with tapes, how much people have rediscovered them and everything, but the fact that it's not, I think most people knee-jerk react to be like, oh, this is just a kitschy nostalgia thing. It's like, oh, cool, that happened 20 years ago, 50 years ago or whatever, so that's why we like it. And that is part of it, sure. But there's the big part of it is that the people are finding value in cassettes that nothing else is offering right now. I mean, the value that people found of them early on, it still counts now, especially as a reaction to streaming. I mean, I think a lot of cassette labels consciously or unconsciously are like, this, I'm not going to fucking go with this bullshit Spotify stuff where no one's getting paid and no one's really doing a whole lot of work to find my music. It's either getting shoved to them or it isn't, you know. And tape labels are a response to that, and a response to the fact that vinyl got so expensive. And there's just so many, and that was true of cassettes early on. I mean, they were cheaper then too. And I think it's kind of important for people to realize that even if there is nostalgia involved, it's not 100% nostalgia. If it was, I don't think it'd be that interesting to talk about. But it's people finding current value for something that has always had that kind of value, you know.
And again, with that, because one of the other points that like it blew my mind as much as it also was, oh, that just makes sense. The stuff that you have with Max and Doug, where they talk about it just makes sense for this stuff to be mastered on tape. It's made certain the technology itself happens to just actually make a slightly better sound than you're going to get for the CD or vinyl, and it's more apt for this format, thus really enshrining the music and a lot of the stuff that you include on the tape, which also really fun mixtape. I was super happy to hear the Denia Voz cut again. I love that album to death. I was so happy when Geographic North put that out. And awesome. Again, another thing I think that adds to this interesting point, and this is why I'm happy that the book came out when it did. And with the people that are there, Doug and Max really have wonderful quotes. But Doug brings up about remembering pre-computer life and then navigating a time with the internet now, likewise with you. And I think having people like that in those roles can be really important to kind of navigate that stuff. It reminds me of like directors who worked in the silent era and then moved to sound and had to adapt to that. And you're seeing that adoption, but it's completely different time, completely different formats, just totally different way.
And I think it's especially interesting for like you guys or for guys of Doug and Max's age, because it's a much more balanced thing. Like for me, as much as I've been involved in the internet for a long time, I still feel like pre-internet is always going to be kind of more defining part of my life than the internet was just at my age. But for people who are really straddling the line, where they grew up in a time when the internet was developing enough that everything was kind of hybridized already then, and so things have shifted for them in kind of nonlinear ways. As opposed to me, my trajectory is more, there wasn't an internet and now there was. But I think for people younger than me, it's a little bit more blurry and hard to track that way. And I think that opens up opportunities for people to make kind of pathways that people hadn't thought of before, you know. I think that's what's happening with a lot of cassette labels.
And again, at the moment, really the cassette labels that like what, especially that maybe you didn't get to contribute to the book, cassette labels, did you like want to shout out, or you've really been moved by?
Yeah. You know, to be honest, I can't 100% remember if I tried to, at the very least, like pop a little reference to every label I could think of. But I mean, I don't think I mentioned Doom Trip, which I love. Doom Trip. That's a great label.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, we had one fan question from Mike Haley. He was asking Tabs Out or Doom Trip. I think you're choosing.
They're feuding right now online, aren't they?
Oh, they're always feuding. I'm trying to meet
them. Yeah. I love them both. I would not be able to choose between the two of them.
Might have to go Doom Trip. He put out the Haitian J.
Yeah.
He got that kicked ass.
Yeah. He's a cool guy, and he definitely has a really cool aesthetic and a cool taste and stuff. So
he's also he's just a funny guy. Yeah, he's sick.
Yeah. Oh, totally funny. Yeah, he's hilarious. Yeah, I love his Twitter feeds are great.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really talk about Death Bomb Mark. I don't think too much, which Charlemagne, or I'm not sure what he calls himself now, but he's been doing so much cool stuff for so long, and and very wide ranging types of releases on there, and those crazy releases of that one band that are just like strictly bluntly about killing cops. I don't know if you've seen that band. I think I've
never seen this one, but
yeah, I can't remember the name of the band, but one of the tapes is called "I've Been Out Killing Cops," and it's like
that's so funny. Yeah,
kind of the boldness of that is really I admire that a lot. Just kind of like not even trying to worry about what's going to happen. They're just putting it out there,
I also give big shout out to that label because at first it can seem like a nightmare to navigate the website or exactly like what's the discography, how's it going, but once I understood how Death Bomb Mark worked, their distro, I really give props to them being like committed to we gotta not try to sell our stuff on Bandcamp, and they've been doing a distro for years.
Right.
An old KCSB programmer has a 2006 tape from
wow, that's great. Yeah.
But, wow.
Yeah. The main dude behind it was in Foot Village. Did you ever hear that band?
I've got the one reissue Foot Village tape. That also massive.
They were incredible. Yeah, they were a great band. Great band. Yeah.
And that was because World Village, the reissue when they did that, also stems to like the first Crash Cymbals release, and that's
right. Yep.
As well.
Yep.
Thomas, you got to hear Foot Village. Funniest band ever.
I'll have to check them out.
Yeah, they're great.
I guess we're coming into like just a couple final things here.
Okay.
Before we go about with our day, we get our super on with. Because I know you're probably going to be leaving Twitter. You're going to be departing for the bluer skies.
We'll see. I mean, maybe so.
And again, you just posted a really great, you can only choose one, which was this game that you played kind of where you just gave to Twitter a photo of a tape rack on eBay or something and just gave us the kind of chance of like, choose the favorite or choose the thing that if you could save one, you would.
Right.
And just last night, you had your friend in the DC area who posted those two incredible Napa Valley racks. And that, in my opinion, I sent that to an old music writer pal who basically saw one tape and then said, that's Gen X pre Nirvana Utopia.
It is.
that rack that guy posted in a way collected probably like 50 to 60% of the stuff on there. I'm very picky about some stuff that I would want to add to all, but it really struck me of how you look at somebody's racks. And in the same way, like in that movie Hacker, where like the password tells you all about the person. You can really explicitly see somebody's like musical development and just as they developed.
Oh yeah, and I mean I love all the physical formats. I'm not, even though tape is one of my favorites, I'm not kind of like anti any other format. But I do think there's something more magical about a rack of tapes compared to a rack of CDs or a vinyl. I mean, a vinyl in a shelf looks really super cool too, but a rack of tapes or something just like you just could feel like when you see a picture of it on the internet, you can feel like you could grab the tape right out and start playing it,
And with that though, because like you've seen many people's tape collections over the years, you trawled through those photos doing this a lot. But did it ever feel really reinforced just looking at someone's personal collection and like being like, we would have been friends, or I know this person at heart?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. And even if you don't think you necessarily know the person, you can sort of imagine that you would have hung out in a group of people that person would have been in the group of too, So pretty awesome.
And that's also, I mean, that's why I hang out on like cassette culture as well. I love seeing what people are saying. And it's interesting because I'm seeing a few users that are trying harder to post weirder stuff, but it's like just came back from the garage sale and it's all these 80s hair metal tapes or all of these 80s tapes but I guess I was just mentioning because I love just seeing those photos and following it. So I still go to like Cassette Culture just to see what people are posting. And it's interesting. There's a few people that are posting really like out there indie stuff where they've got their 90s collections, but then you see a lot of just 80s kind of metal or hair or a particular type of 80s mass culture that just killed it on the format. And people are like, that's what this format was for. And again, then to read the book, to see all the other stuff around, to go to the record shops, you can realize, no, there's a whole other realm to that. But also, I kind of just think that's just as valid. And I'm so happy those people are finding Cocktail in their parents' attics.
And I hope I'll be around long enough to where we're nostalgically posting pictures of the entire Astral Spirits catalog, or
right.
I'm gonna get there for that. I mean, when people do new cassettes right now, I'm following and watching what's going on there. And a couple of releases have been pretty good. I know also haven't seen anything on New Ferric, at least, or that's been advertised from like a major label that, hey, we're putting it on the Super Ferric. But I'm really hopeful that the cassette itself can actually kind of improve a bit.
I think it can. Yeah.
And again, I know it got brought up in an interview you've done. I have now one of the We Are Rewind, so I fiddled about with one of those. And while it's nowhere near as good as a Sony boombox or a Sony Walkman or a tape deck, I'm also really just happy that there is now a Bluetooth guy, and if you just leave it on your desk.
That's cool. Yeah, I want to check that out. It sounds like a really cool piece of equipment for sure, and fun to use.
It's good for the Bluetooth component.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I guess that's kind of it. I mean, I don't know, where can people keep up with all things like Marc Masters and like, High Bias? Sure. Like, where can people find it?
Yeah. Well, the best place for the book and the tape right now is I do have a Bandcamp site for it. It's highbiasbook.bandcamp.com, where you can get the book and the tape, or one or the other or both together. And I'll sign it for you too, if you're interested in that.
Oh, sick, dude. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And in terms of keeping up with my writing and stuff, I mean, I'll be on Twitter enough to at least keep posting the stuff I'm writing about. I'm trying to disconnect otherwise, but I'm hopefully at least going to do that. And so I'll always be around there, and I'll still be writing for Bandcamp and Pitchfork until they completely die. So you can always look for my byline on there too.
And any new book ideas coming, you think, or thinking about?
Any new what? I'm sorry?
Book ideas.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I don't have anything specifically that I've gotten to yet, but there are definitely a couple ideas that I've got cooking. I'm hoping to, and I am hoping. I have said I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but I have had some pretty good signs that we might be able to get the No Wave thing happening again. So,
sick, dude.
So maybe within the next year or two that'll happen too, which would be nice. So.
I'll faint. I'll be there fainting with my copy of it. But I'll just keep re-renting this for every 6 weeks.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Awesome.
Oh man.
I guess I don't know. Just want to ask one thing too. Have you ever been like, I guess, like scared for like Bandcamp or Pitchfork or anything like that? Like, are you like scared for the future?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's sort of amazing that Pitchfork is still going now. I don't know exactly how it's going to keep going. I mean, because they trimmed the staff down just to a few people, and the site, even though they said they're going to be folded into GQ, the site's still existing on its own. But I mean, I like yesterday when there was news that Damo Suzuki passed away, I didn't see a news item up at Pitchfork.
Yeah.
I don't know if there still is one. I mean, there wasn't one right away, which before there would have been one within seconds. That might have been the way I found out about it even, So those kind of things not happening, it is scary. I do think that those things are, the Pitchfork and Bandcamp both are on shaky ground right now. And it definitely is a little bit frightening. And I think the only way out of these things is for either the people who run the things to start owning them, or if we can somehow find people who really are music people and not Silicon Valley tech people,
for sure,
because they just think of these things as properties, even if they got into them for good reasons to begin with. They think of them as assets rather than as things that are there to sustain a community, which Bandcamp really became a community, and it's frightening. That can be in the hands of people who are just worried about money. It's not good.
It's crazy to me that's the thing, It just blows me away. Yeah. I guess what would you think is like the future? Like, say like Pitchfork and Bandcamp go down. Like, what do you say is going to be the future of, like, I don't know, these communities? I guess like, where are people going to go?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's hard to predict. I do think I don't think we gave blogs enough of a chance. I mean, there was a time when blogs were really like fanzines and really like and people, and not just, you know, a million blogs out there like there can be. There were blogs that mattered to a lot of different people and that shared things in between each other and that got music around in good ways that was like relatively unfiltered. And I feel like that got kind of usurped by the bigger websites. I mean, in a way, you could almost argue Altered Zones, as much as I liked it, kind of killed a lot of that once it went away. And Google not having the RSS reader anymore and stuff.
RSS reader, the lack of anyone doing that has been killed. Altered Zones, that was like a real second movement or kind of outsider movement and trying to legitimize. And then they had a really solid end of the year list, really solid stuff. They were right on the money about where the 2010s were headed. And then they got the and they just had to fold. They just had to go out. But I remember, like, I got to Aquarium Drunkard right before the remodel, and I Patreoned for them, and I've been really pleased with Aquarium Drunkard.
Oh yeah, they're great.
But it's like Gorilla versus Bear barely posts. My Kentucky blog doesn't really do much.
Yeah, I mean, the Quietus is still hanging in there, which that's important, you know. But I'm hopeful because a lot of writers seem to have been getting a decent amount of luck with their newsletters, which I'm not a big fan of newsletters. I'd rather go to a website than get something in my inbox for some reason. I don't know why. But I'm hoping the fact that newsletters are somewhat viable means that blogs could be again. I hope so.
Because you're also, when you talk about, it's like, hey, newsletters doing well, Sean Ronaldo, I'm reading yours because you like established that base over years, or like Philip Sherburne, you have 30 years.
Oh, exactly.
So I'm already looking then at a group of established guys. And so I want to see the new voices really cover experimental.
For sure.
Again, like Ted Davis is doing that, but I haven't seen a piece from Ted Davis that has truly knocked me out. And to me, provided me a lens that I'm like, bingo. But also he cut his teeth on blogs as well, and he's got like his old vaporwave like blog reviews hanging out, and those are fun. You can see some progress going through that. One site, at least I'll say for this, I want to shout out. It's Alex Tripp's Endoral, or at least Miss Tripp. I want to make sure, but she had reached out to me because I had brought up the idea of, and it killed me. It's like, why did they never take like an HTML 1.0 Drudge Report style site and just put music news on it? And just flock from Instagram or Twitter or other stuff. And she did that. So her website that she, ran the anticipation list and had all kinds of little good stuff on, she's just posting random news bits or reviews or playlists or stuff and tour announcements that she's just picking up. And I like that. I think it's super easy for her to post that. She's got at the bottom all the little independent media outlets. And it's nice. It at least makes me happy. And I also give credit to Post Trash because Dan just lets people write about stuff. That doesn't mean the writing is great. And I think a lot of us have to get beyond regurgitation of PR and really develop voices and just keep your nose down and write only about 3 to 4 things that like really matter. But I like the group that's established there and that he gave that opportunity and people took leaps from that. And unfortunately, as with everything, like the young people are, like you say, they're important not only for new voices, but they're the people that are positioned that can take some chances. Because when you're young and just starting, you can kind of live off less. You don't have as many commitments. You can kind of spend your time on something like this that might not make you much money, but is important to do. And the older you get, the more pressure there is. Like it's harder to do writing for free as you get older. So, we really are reliant on more and more young people feeling inspired to do that. Oh man, that's a really good point, Mark. I've only got a little bit more of my youth left for this, Thomas. We only got a little bit.
I mean, some of us are lifers. I'll always be doing. I think you probably will too. But as you get older, you realize that more and more people don't have the time or opportunity to do it, and so young people are really important for that to keep it going.
For real. Thank you.
Sure.
Well.
All right. Well, I guess that kind of brings us to the end here, Mark. We do have like one final question. It's a pretty big one. I don't know, Maddie, do you want to take it? You want me to take it?
Thomas, you got it. I think it's big.
Okay.
Take it.
All right, Mark. Yeah, it's huge. Okay, are you ready?
Uh-huh.
Okay. A rat is going to jump into your mouth. Do you want this rat to jump into your mouth head first or butt first, and why?
I thought you were going to ask me who was going to win the Super Bowl.
Oh,
Missed opportunity. Missed opportunity.
Let's see. I'd go head first just because even if something bad happens, at least I feel like it was like a personal connection we made, and
that's like so nice. Yeah.
At least we got to know each other in the little bit of time before something bad happens. So.
Mark, that was like one of the nicest answers ever. That's why I love this question, because you really get to like know someone like a little bit like further. Yeah. Like, what does this person care about? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyways,
that's a good question.
Well, hey, I credit that question with landing me my current job, because
really,
when I had my job interview, he saw that like I list my radio show on my resume just so people can kind of like see that I like to do stuff. I don't know, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Anyways, he was like, okay, like what's your favorite question that you're like, what's one question you ask every person on your radio show? And I was like, oh man, like, do I say this question to this guy that you know what I mean? And so, I asked him the question, and he was just like, he's like laughing and stuff. So, like, surprisingly, I was like, honestly, like this could go either way. You know what I mean?
Right.
But great. I had done so many interviews at that point, like looking for jobs. I was like, I don't even care, dude. I'm gonna just ask it.
That's awesome. Oh, you took a good chance there.
Exactly. He called me back the next day, and he's like, yeah, hey, we got the job. And I'm like, oh, sick.
That's awesome. And you still have that job, huh?
I still have the job. Yeah.
That's great. That's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah. Well, anyways, Mark, I guess that's kind of all we have for today. Thanks for everybody tuning into TBD on KCSB FM 91.9 every Sunday, Net Radio every Wednesday at 7. This has been Marc Masters. Thanks so much for being on the show, Mark. This is super fun.
Yeah, thank you very much. I love talking to you guys. It was really fun.
Thank you.